Hello and welcome back to the Time to Calibrate podcast. This is our 10th episode. Where has the time gone? Hi, I'm Brent Robillard, editor of The Calibrated Wrist and Calibre 321 on Instagram. As always, I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Bob Allaby from the YouTube channel Time to Go Travel and Timepieces, and Mark Levesque, writer at Worn and Wound. Today, we are joined by a very special guest and one who is particularly familiar to Mark, or should be. It is my pleasure to welcome Zach Weiss, co-founder of the online journal, Worn and Wound. Good morning to you all, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning, Brent.
Good morning.
Like all good watch podcasts, we like to begin with a wrist check. And as our guest, Zach, we'd love to have you kick things off.
Sure. I have on Ming 3707 Monolith.
Wonderful. How about you, Mark?
We've got an article coming out, I believe today, a joint article with the contributors on Worn and Wound for watches that we own but don't wear. And I happen to be wearing it today, so it's my Timex Q. You'll have to read the article to find out why I don't wear it and how I got it.
Okay, well, I have my plans set for next week, I guess. Bob, third time is the charm. What's up your sleeve today?
I am wearing the Black Bay Pro today. It hasn't been getting the wrist time it's deserved lately, so had to put it on this morning.
Wonderful. Well, on my wrist, I have the Longines Legend Diver 39 in anthracite. I have owned it for less than 72 hours now. So, gentlemen, welcome to my honeymoon. Zach, let's get started here. While there are some enthusiasts who come to the hobby of watch collecting later in life, it is equally true that many start the journey very early on, and I understand that you're one of those. Could you tell us a little bit about those early years and maybe at what point you stopped being someone who wore a watch and somebody who was into watches?
Yeah. No, so I can't remember a time when I wasn't wearing a watch. I just grew up with watches always on my wrist. Not like crazy watches, Swatch, Flick Flacks, Casios, Timexes, and whatever. My dad was into watches, and he got me into watches at a young age. So that was just like a thing that we bonded on. And living in New York City, there were plenty of stores to go into. So that would be like I don't know how often we did it. Maybe once every few months or something. We'd go over to the big Tourneau store at 57th, which is now Berger, Kenjo, a bunch of other stores. We just like walk around and look at all this stuff. And
Kenjo.
Yeah. And Kenjo was awesome. I always forget if they're still there or not. Sorry, Kenjo. But I think they might disappear for a little while. But they it was back then. I got to see like Alon Silverstein, some cool like independents when I was a kid. That like later in life, I've since been into. So I always wore a watch. I went to college for fine arts and kind of continued sort of being interested in aesthetic things, and that sort of pushed me into a potential career of industrial design. And I went and got a master's in industrial design. And when in my grad school program, I just kind of always had this thought in my back of my head that like I'd like to get into watches because it's just once again something I'd always enjoyed and had on my mind. And then like after grad school, I kept buying watches. We were talking like, I had like some cool Nixons and it was not Unimatic, it was the Uniform Wears back when they first came out. They were, I don't even know if they're around anymore. But those really like very minimalist design watches that sort of became like a trend. I guess around, 2010 or so. And then like Worn and Wound started spinning up, which came out of just conversations with business partner and friend from college, Blake Mallon, co-founder of Worn and Wound. He knew I was into watches. He was looking for watches and asked my advice. And that's sort of when we discovered the kind of gaps in the online community, at least as far as like, websites go, to really talk about watches that were more affordable. And, we didn't quite know about it yet, but it was kind of, we were starting to get the sense that there was this emerging, trend for what is now called micro brands. But back then it was just like, what are these funky little brands like, Helson and stuff like that, rocketed off like a year or two later. But yeah, so at that point, I think it's, I forgot how you phrased it, but at that point, I think it went from like this like interest in watches to this much greater thing where, I kind of went down the rabbit hole on everything. I mean, I started with a better precursory knowledge than maybe a lot of people do. I knew my mechanicals from my courses at the time, but I didn't really like have the obsession with the brands or a deep knowledge yet. But Yeah, so coincides a little bit more. Well, I was really more into the aesthetic. I designed a lot of watches on and computer programs and had really cool renderings. And now when I look back, I'm like, no, none of that is actually manufacturable. It's kind of fun.
Sorry, Zach, you mentioned Kenjo before. Is that store still there? Is it something else, or?
That's what I am not sure about. I feel a little bad because I'm fairly certain at one point, I'll just look this up, that they had either close. I mean, Pearson Beam, it's coming up online, is open. So hey, Kenjo.
Yeah, I had a friend named Mike who was the manager there at the time, and we used to participate a lot on Time Zone. And when 9/11 happened, he happened to be working that day. And when the towers came down, he had to run for his life like so many other people. And it completely changed him like it did many people. And he got completely out of watches, out of retail. He got into cycling, moved out, I think, to Colorado or something. And I haven't heard from him in 20 years or however long it's been.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite the experience.
Wow.
I had a kind of a similar, well, sort of similar early days where I was an owner of watches, but not into watches. And for different reasons, you end up kind of going down the rabbit hole of forums, blogs, YouTube. Once I became passionate about watches, it took a while to learn what I was really into. It's easy to sort of follow the crowd at first, and it's forever evolving our tastes in watches. But I'm just wondering what you look for in a watch in your own collection nowadays versus maybe back when you were first getting into it.
Sure. I mean, I think when I was first getting into it, I just wanted to sort of try everything in a sense. I definitely had some, specific tastes. I mean, I wasn't really ever into very large watches just because I never thought they fit me well. When I first got into this, my budget was very, very small. So that was just a limiting factor. I was going first for Seiko 5s. And, I remember, the first time I picked up like a Helson, they come up twice, but the Helson, I was a skin diver, like the one that looked like the 50 Fathoms. I forget the name of it now. That was a huge jump up for me. I went from like $200 to $500, Yeah. And once you hit those ranges, you never come back down. But like,
oh yeah.
No. So I just wanted to try everything. And, as kind of trends were emerging, following them a little bit to now I've like tried a lot of watches. I've sold a lot of watches. I've owned them. I have way too many as like part of just purchasing them and being part of this industry and, working in collabs and having it's just like I've amassed a few watches. And so now I'm really just more into different experiences and really try to find, I don't know, like watches that still stand out to me as like, it can be harder, which is good. It's like I'm not as drawn to everything that comes out. I have a much easier time being wow, I like that watch, but I don't need it, which is it's a nice place to be. But something like this Ming, which is was watching just purchased most recently. I had nothing else like it. It was nothing that was like kind of this very clean modern design, nothing that's really building off of sapphire like that. I think I have like one other fully PVD'd watch. So this one, it kind of had the potential of filling a niche. So I was like, I'll try that. Plus I just always admired the brand. I don't know if that really answers the question, but it's sort of like, it sort of changes day by day too. It's like, but yeah, it's unfortunately leading me more towards expensive watches. It's like things like, it's like I've had my fair share of at ETA 2824s and Sleet SW200s. Now I want to try different kinds of movements, and I mean, as you know, that just gets expensive fast. So,
of course, yeah.
So, Zach, you mentioned your graduate degree a little bit earlier, and the fact that you've worked as a designer, obviously. But as I understand it, right out of graduate school, you might have almost become a watch designer. Can you tell us a little bit about your MZ Berger experience?
Wow, good research. So one of my first interviews after grad school was with MZ Berger. Yeah, you nailed it. Which is like a watch. I mean, I don't know what you call them. They're a licensing watch aid company and design company based in I guess in Queens now. They own a lot of different like old names, but they do like Hello Kitty watches and stuff like that. Or at least they did when I interviewed with them like 15 years ago. I believe actually Jonathan from Brew did work for them for a little while too. So, and yeah, I interviewed there, and I had like it was one of those times where you're like given an assignment, which I quickly learned was something I would never ever do again. Like just as like, I was very green. I had like, only been like an intern or something. So it's like the idea, and I mean, take it or leave it, but my advice is never do free work kind of a thing, And so, they asked me to like make a pitch for something. And I mean, I worked really hard on it. I mean, it's like 3D realistic or like photorealistic 3D renders. I still look at these watches. I'm like, you know what? They're kind of cool. Like it was just, the whole idea was it had to be like a, like an environmentally friendly watch. Like came up with this whole like snap together case, and it had a no spring bar design and like different dials you could print. I thought it was rad. It was just not at all what they were looking for. Totally went past them. So yeah, I did not get the job. No.
You should put that up on the Word and Wound.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, they're fun renders. I should show them at some point. Like
absolutely.
The things I was doing.
So you went to college, I guess, with co-founder Blake Mullen, and you met James Helms later on. Now, creative synergy is really important in your team. We notice it even here on a podcast. But clearly, things have worked out for the three of you. How did you know that these were the right guys, and what was it like working together in the early days?
Yeah, sure. So, with Blake, it was like it was easier, right? But so we've known each other since freshman in college. Like we lived down the hall from each other. So we'd known each other for a while at that point. And I mean, once we started Warner Wow without any intention of it being a business. So there wasn't really any like forethought on how this would divide in terms of, our roles in a company or anything like that. It was just like, we like watches, let's make a thing. And then a year in though, we met James, who was running another website at the time called Real Watch Reviews, I believe, which was sort of on a similar track as us. He was reviewing a lot of watches, sort of more affordable things. I think he'd done some Sins and, Braymonts and things like that. But he liked our site. He was like, we should combine forces. We got into conversations with him, and that's when we started, we threw out the concepts of like building this as a business, and at that time getting into strap making. And it just sort of lined up. So his background was in like project management and product design on like an industrial level, but it's really like a manager type of person. I'm a designer. Blake was from actually the non-for-profit like grant writing world, but it's a super like organized, diligent person who knows his way around like a spreadsheet, and just kind of coalesced that we had like some different skill sets. But I mean, I will say like for a very long time, the business was so small, and it was really just like scraping by on little things that it didn't really get to this place where we really had three separate roles we had to play in the company. For quite some time. And so, yeah, I would say, I mean, this was not always smooth sailing. I'd say having partners is, it's an interesting process. I'd say absolutely necessary for where we have gotten, because like I said, we have these different, skill sets. So it has worked out because, Warner One does all these different things now. Obviously there's the blog, there's the shop, there's the events, there's marketing, so it's like, it's too scatterbrained for one person kind of a thing. So we all have our sort of specialties within it. But yeah, once the business really kind of like accelerated a bit, with when we launched the watches in the shop, that's sort of when like the business really kind of started to grow at a faster pace, and we had to become more professional about it,
Well, you say you didn't start it as a business, and I understand that completely. But like most successful businessmen, you did notice a hole in the market, and then you proceeded to fill it. So in 2011, that hole that you saw was a lack of news coverage for affordable watches and what we call micro brands. While Warner Wound still covers those watches, you've obviously broadened your scope. Do you think that this is a logical progression in the watch journey for even an individual, or is it a response to the audience, the market, a bit of both?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit of both. I mean, I'd say it's mostly because of our own progression as in terms of both our interest and our ability to collect in some ways, but yeah, as Warner Wound got like larger and more popular, we learned, doing the affordable thing was great. It gave us an in and it gave us a niche and like a perspective. And then it got in our way because suddenly and we still honestly hear this from brands, companies like, oh, you're the guys who write about affordable watches. And we're like, actually, we write about everything. We have an affection for quote unquote affordable watches. This is an industry where affordable is still extremely expensive. So it's like, it's pretty absurd. And it's like, and I might personally appreciate when a brand can do something at $800 that's more clever than what you did at 8,000. Like, I just think that's cool, so maybe I'm a little biased there, but yeah, I mean, our audience grew, we grew, our interest grew, and, our, voice in the industry sort of grew. So it was logical to expand out to those other things, and on a personal level, like there's no price point, or I don't see it as much as price points anymore. It's like, I think Zach Weiss puts it more eloquently, and he's probably written this out. I'm not going to quote him very well, but it's, it's like, it's like art. You don't go to a museum and say, what am I going to buy off the wall? Right. And it's like, it's the same thing with watches. You don't go and see a Roger Smith and say like, wow, I can't appreciate that because I'm not buying it. It's like, no, you just appreciate craft and art. And, so it's nice that some of them you can buy though at the same time.
So that's definitely a great perspective.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I think Worn and Wound did for myself and a lot of people it was an eye opener back in my early days to those independent brands. Like, you guys would have introduced me to a brand like maybe Christopher Ward that I'd never heard of, that sort of thing. And you guys obviously get your hands on a ton of watches over there. But for this year, is there any standouts when it comes to independent brands or even mainstream brands for you as far as releases go?
Oh, man.
I know. Sorry.
Yeah, gosh, that's tough just because I like have to like think about everything, and my memory is on, like, oh, it's great for all these things. God, what is there's the challenge is like a lot stands out sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like, and I'm really impressed by what brands are doing now. I actually just wrote an article. I don't think it's published yet, where it started with the joke of like, that we've gotten to a point where like there's like so many amazingly cool watches coming out between like $3,000 to $5,000 that are doing things that like we just didn't see brands doing before. That it's kind of like, oh, shame. It's like, sucks for me because now I can't choose, right? Like, once upon a time there'd be one really clever watch, and now there's several. And I named like, the Ming Minimalist, the Space One Tellurium in there. There's
Belcanto.
Yeah, Belcanto. Exactly. Like, this price range is amazing. And yeah, just seeing more and more there. So it's kind of tough because we're actually at I think a really impressive point, and Wind Up the Fair was a really good actually opportunity for me to see a lot of those watches for like the first time myself. So I kind of left that with my head spinning, and yeah, so my answer is a little bit like, there's so much.
Yeah, I have to agree with you.
Yeah. I don't know. This week, the Serica just came out the other day. That was in the office. We were all like geeking out over it. So in terms of like a very recent things, the 1174 Parade, just in a brand trying to do something really different that I think was outside of not only their comfort zone, but the comfort zone of like a lot of collectors a few years ago. I think that's a very impressive, well executed piece. It's like, they took the assignment seriously. It wasn't like, oh, we need a dress watch, let's make a dress watch. Like, they obsessed over that thing. So cool.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think you brushed up against this a couple of minutes ago, Zach, when you talked about comparing an $800 watch that did something clever with an $8,000 watch that didn't do it quite so well. Have you ever been blown away in the same way by something that was inexpensive or affordable that you have been with a luxury piece?
In the same way, like...
In the sense that
Like in this,
that you looked at that and you thought, this is just as good for what it is as anything else at another price point.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think now, you see that with a lot of finishing, case finishing in particular. Mark just mentioned the Bel Canto. I feel like that's a watch I come back to a lot, and it's pretty easy to come back to because of its success at the price point. But the level of fit and finish on that watch, on the components on the dial, the case is very nice. I'd say it's not a very elaborate case, so it doesn't have that many facets and things like that, but it's beautifully finished. And just thinking I know what you see sometimes now on an $800 to $1,500 watch in terms of brushing and polishing, even if it's far more machine executed than a watch supposedly is at another price point, you can't tell the difference in hand anymore. And I don't know, if you're to hand them to somebody who maybe, I don't know, was if you're a little less maybe aware of how things worked in the industry, or once again supposedly worked in the industry, and you're tell me which of these costs more. I don't think they would have an easy time discerning between them anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So there's that stuff, but then I also just think the ingenuity now in movements, and recreating different components, making modules and things like that. I mean, I was just looking at that brand Adawak, their website yesterday.
Absolutely.
They're doing all these wandering hour modules, and obviously they're very Urwerk-esque, and they're not really hiding that, but it's they've really demystified what this kind of module is with those turning components. And not to say that it's on the par with the mechanics of what Urwerk is doing. I think they kind of they do things at this really high level of complexity, but they're still achieving this very cool effect that seemed impossible, so to say, at $1,000 to maybe $2,000.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had some of those in hand earlier this year at Time to Watches in Geneva, and I was very impressed, frankly.
Yeah.
When you're a designer, and what's the first thing you really look for in a watch? Then is it the aesthetic, or as a watch nerd, is it what's under the hood?
That's a challenging question, because it's sort of maybe brand by brand there.
Okay.
And when it comes together, that's the ideal, right? But I don't think I would. I probably start on the outside initially. If I'm not, if I don't find a watch to be appealing aesthetically, I'm probably not going to get much further than that. At least in terms of my own purchasing habits. If a watch is though maybe kind of blah, but has a really cool movement, I think at least I would find there to be more of a story there. And and sometimes I'm not gonna name brands, but sometimes I feel we see that on on much higher end watches, even from the top side, they can be almost a little bland, and then you flip them over and they have crazy movements in them, and it's the fascination is sort of there. But yeah, I don't know. I feel when you mentioned that, a brand that came to mind is Grand Seiko, which I feel is a brand that really survives on both those levels well, and can kind of bring people in different ways. And I've actually talked to them about this in their store, because they're on Madison Avenue and they get people walking in off the street. I'm when somebody comes in, how the hell do you explain a spring drive versus a dual impulse escapement to somebody who doesn't know about watches? And they're well, they it's, I mean, they didn't say it, but imagine they're well, that's where the aesthetic charms maybe take over, in those instances, because there's only so much you can teach somebody at a
For sure.
So I have a kind of a question my primary outlet when it comes to content is YouTube. And as a consumer of watches or almost any product, I'll read reviews, look at photos, but in the end, video is often what helps me make the final decision. It's the visual aspect, but a lot of time also the enthusiasm, or sometimes the lack of enthusiasm of the presenter says a lot. Just wondering how important is the visual medium to the future success of Worn and Wound?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So, I always found when we first started, I felt that other watch websites at the time, and it was a very, very, very different landscape, mind you, didn't really didn't even really have like particularly great photography at the time. And, you know, it was sort of like, well, that was a place we could start, right? They could show you more angles of watches. We could have more natural lighting. And like, I was a terrible photographer at the time, but I still think I might have done a little bit better than some other people at the moment. But, you know, we've since, I think everyone's sort of changed how they do that, but it was all about giving you that perspective of like what it might be like to hold a watch, even if you're not. And then we got into video very early for that same reason. You know, we're doing like the over shoulder, style of video, just like floating hands or whatever people called them. And it was kind of to get that much further, right? It's like seeing the rotate, you know, the little things, the way light catches it in motion. I mean, the motion is just so important, obviously, for watches. And that was a very good thing we did. But we very quickly just hit the wall of like the reality of making video, especially as like I had no background in making video. So we would shoot them, and I mean, they would take hours to shoot because it was so like unnerving. And, you know, at first when you're in front of a camera, it's like very, very difficult if you're not used to that kind of a thing. So there's this really laborious process. Then I'd edit them, and like it'd be like 3 a.m. I'd be finishing it the night before I wanted to publish that stuff. Eventually we met Ilya, we became managing editor. He had a bit of a video background, and he like knew how to edit a bit more. And so, you know, for a while we were doing that, but we hit a point where like something had to give at the company because we just had too much going on, and we didn't have the revenue at the time to hire videographers. So video fell to the wayside. And I mean, like personally, I'd say I think that was our biggest mistake we've made, is like that we lost momentum in the video, like on YouTube, because you kind of, as you know, from the YouTube algorithm stuff, you can't just quite like recover from that so easily, because you get like pushed off the priority list or whatever it is. So we've since tried to come back to doing that. We produce, you know, we make videos now much more regularly. We've had videographers full time, and the goal is to be more established on, you know, on those other mediums. But I think the challenge that we're finding, and we've always found a bit, is that there's a style to these different platforms, and it seems like to be successful, at least in like sort of a short-term successful sort of a way, you need to sort of play into those trends to grow. Maybe it's a thumbnail, maybe it's a titling, maybe it's a style of video in general, and it's not necessarily how we want to do it. You know, we just have like, I don't know, so there's a method of how we do things, you know, like a certain style to our content that I think needs to match back to the written content. So it's finding that balance, you know, and I think we're not necessarily making videos that get like the massive hits, because, you know, it's not my style to go on and be like, here's 10 reasons not to buy a watch kind of a thing. Like, I know it'll get clicks, but it's just not who we are. Instead, I make way too long videos every other week about, you know, things that have come out, and just make weird inside watch nerd jokes, you know, and hopefully they'll catch on. But, you know, and then as that goes further out, you know, it's like about decentralizing media and everything, and TikTok and all this other stuff. Like, we're experimenting with that, but I think you can only go so far when it's like unnatural to you at the same time. And I don't think, you know, I'm not about to get on TikTok at my old, you know, and I feel too old for that.
Do a little dance.
You know,
It's
just not good. Maybe if we hire some like much younger employees at some point, and they're like, they know how to do this, but until then, you know.
Yeah, what you need is those gimmicky shock faces on the thumbnails, or the angry eyebrows, and
Exactly. No, and it's just not our vibe. But
I was just going to say, maybe you could do a top 10 reasons why we don't do top 10 videos.
yeah, exactly. I've joked many times that like we should just do the top 10 best lists of the year as a list.
listicle of listicles. Yeah, as someone who writes for many of the Warner One divisions, editorial, wind-up shop, the partnerships, I have to admit at the beginning, the lines between all those divisions was quite blurry for me. I eventually found out that there's quite a wall between them. Can you tell our listeners about that? And how does Warner One identify sponsor content versus editorial? And how is keeping outside voices from influencing editorials essential?
Yeah, certainly. So, that's it's always been an important part of kind of growing the business, is keeping these kind of walls between the different, sections. I mean, really editorial versus commercial, and it's something, we constantly hear from, the social media warriors who are trying to call out old watch media for being extremely corrupt, that there is no distinction between anything. But, I think that's a case by case situation. And I know a lot of people in the industry, I think they're more than above board, but it's always been just really important for us to be like, fuck down. These things are separate, right? Like, we don't have our managing editor go in and sell packages for sponsored content when we're meeting with people in Geneva. And we used to see that we'd go to meetings at Basel, and the editor would also be the salesperson for some companies, generally larger magazines, less, like enthusiast focused things. It never felt right to us. And for obvious reasons, right? It's like, there is that whole conceptual rub, like the second you accept money, are you willing to talk badly about something, right? And it's like, I think that really comes down to integrity and, and then also like the style of your content in general. So it's, it's Warner Wound is not, saving lives. Like, we write about watches and we ultimately like help inform people on purchases, and we give our opinions on them. And nobody's ever been told not to voice an opinion because we work with that person. And the other side of that is that we have worked with brands, and they'll be like, so like, why didn't they review that watch? And it's like, well, just because you work with us doesn't mean we're going to review your watch. Like, that's the other side of it. It's like, you want to appeal to editorial, you want them to talk about your watch, email editorial. They'll, tell you what they want to do with your watch, if they want to do anything at all, And it's like, it makes it sound so contentious, but it's like, okay, it's like brand X that we talk about anyway is also somebody we work with. And it's not like that unnatural that these things would end up being like, oh, well, if, of course we'd like to write about X watch from that brand. It's just, we're not going to write about it because you asked us to, kind of a thing. And certainly you're not going to read it before we publish it. You're not going to get, you're not going to get to change anything, barring something, we've gotten emails or something that's factually incorrect or something. We might make like an edit there, kind of a thing. But even that's extremely rare from brands. But, and then, the commercial side of things too, that's the other obviously potential rub. We've never done a shop this post kind of a thing. So if we review a watch, or somebody, in our staff wants to review a watch that happens to be from a brand we sell, we don't say like, oh, by the way, you can go buy this at Wind Up Watch Shop. We link out to the brands, and that's it. We link to their company website. I just don't think that is the right way to do business, and I'm sure we're losing out on sales. And I know a lot of other companies have been quite successful in doing that. I mean, there's ones, I'm sure we could all name different ones, from YouTubers to, other publications that are literally, I didn't say it, literally, they're just sending people back and forth. And I mean, I think it's weird because it's become a lot more accepted now. But when we were first doing this, like, that was just like a hard, like, obviously we can't do it, like it was even we weren't sure how people would react to us selling anything. And then like that was years of conversation whether or not we'd ever sell watches. It's like we had our straps, but like, can we really sell a watch other than a collaboration? And the reality was we needed to grow the business. So it was kind of like, beyond getting investment or whatever, that was sort of the only route to do it. And obviously then HomeDG actually beat us to the punch by several months. We were already working on it at that point. So they broke the ice on the industry, and it was how people reacted to them. And what do you know? People didn't really care. They like who you are. They want to buy watches from you because they trust you. But yeah, we just keep this wall up. And then in terms of anything that is presented commercially on the site. If it's from the shop, it always says wind up watch shop from it. Very often it takes you even out of our main site over to the shop's blog roll, just to really kind of put you into the environment for that, unless it's like a larger launch, like a limited edition, in which case we have this like, other sort of template for that. And then when we work with companies, I mean, it always says in partnership with at the top, if not, even more obvious ways. I've seen other ways. There's different rules, around the world. And I think in Europe, it's not as clean cut as it's supposed to be here. Not that anyone really is like monitoring this stuff or abiding by it, but like you're really supposed to, be very clear. Something has been sponsored here, whereas, in Europe, it seems more like you can just say like, well, I don't even know if you need to say anything. There's definitely times where you get a sense that like brands are paying for content and because it's so like timed for promotion and it's so like aggressive or like has sort of, there's larger campaigns. Like you see a brand 10 times on a website in a week and it's like, well, that doesn't feel too organic, does it? And so, we try to be, cognizant of all that stuff. I mean, editorial and commercial talk in the sense that, well, obviously we're also a small company, everyone talks. It's not like we literally keep these people separated from each other. I want to make that clear, everyone's friends and whatever. But like, we have meetings so that, editorial is also aware of the commercial, schedule. So yeah, if we have something we're working on with a brand that is sponsored content, we're not going to drop a review of that watch that same day, if that even happens to be lining up. But,
And just for the record, we write all the sponsored content. It isn't, we're not regurgitating a press release or they don't write it for us. This is all us writing all that.
Yeah, no, we create the content. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to, speak for Kyle, but we also I think we work with the brands to create the right content for Horn and Wound too. So it's, it's commercial content, but it is tailored to our readers and to our own style and vibe. So I mean, I don't know if this is totally made up. If brand X came and we want to do like a series on like wedding, I don't know, jewelry, watches for, it's like, that's not really Horn and Wound's vibe, let's maybe think about something else we can do with you.
Yeah, we did a thing with Rado for graduation last spring, I think it was, or at the end of spring. And it was in our voice using that theme, and it worked out really, really well.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I was going to ask this a couple of minutes from now, but I feel like it might be more relevant just given what we've come down to here. But you once said, I'm not interested in giving bad reviews. And I think I really share that same approach. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to the listeners what you mean by that or how that actually guides editorial in some respect? Yeah,
so I think I can go back a little bit to my art and design education there, and that I went through school getting critiques, right? So you make a painting, your teacher will politely, impolitely, whatever, rip it apart, congratulate you. But it's a sort of, it's a process of constructive criticism that, depending on your professor, can be various levels of harsh, but it's never to belittle or to make themselves feel bigger or more, it's a little hard to articulate, but it's for the sake of the student. So in my mind, when we review a watch, if we absolutely hate it, there's no point in reviewing it, right? To me, the harshest review is that it's never going to show up anyway. I mean, and obviously there's tons of watches we can't get to them all, so it's not like any watches on the site is we don't like, but if we just, it's not right for us, it's not right for our audience, that's sort of that means it's not gonna go well, right? And if we don't have joy in writing about it, it also just sucks to write, right? Having to sit there and put together 2,000 words for something you just absolutely find tedious and boring is unpleasant. But so when we do find fault with a watch, or I find fault with a watch, I think it's about constructive criticism, and there's plenty of watches I love that I also will find points to get into, on those with. And it's, there's obviously a lot of taste that comes in there. Like, oh, the typeface is this, like, if it had been a little bit bolder, it kind of been more, readable. If, just, you can think of these things rather than like, that was a dumb choice, kind of a thing. So yeah. And I just don't know. Warner Wound is meant to be a positive experience. It's meant to bring you joy. And, obviously there's some like schadenfreude or whatever in seeing somebody get ripped apart, but it's ultimately like in the negative way, right? It's like, it's just not who we want to put forth,
I couldn't agree more. You've done some wonderful collaborations with brands, and you've also even moved into the realm of exclusive launches. Can you tell us how those come about and when or how the fit is right for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, so that actually, our very first collab was with Aviate. And I always forget the year that was, but it was a really long time. Like, I am fairly certain we had the first collab watch. I know it came out a little bit before Hodinkie's MB&F that they did. Obviously, that got a little bit more attention than our Aviate. So, but, in that case, it was... they approached us. So like, hey, we had this idea. What if we made something together? And we're like, oh, that'd be cool. And I was extraordinarily excited because I just want to design watches in the end of the day anyway. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of, we did it. It worked. We did it again. Then we started approaching brands that, we thought would be cool to work with. And, we're really lucky early on that like Jorg Schauer at Stova was like into doing that. Because I was like, I mean, was and is a brand that we just really revered, and at the time felt like they were much more recognizable, especially in the like enthusiast circle. So, we started working with them, and now it's kind of grown into like from something we would do once a year to something we do several times a year, and it's frankly like it's a part of our business at this point. It's like it's obviously under the commercial side and whatever, but it's a line of business that factors into like our revenue because they do well, right? It's like if we do our job well and make something interesting, then they go towards our annual revenue goals. So, and that's not the approach I take when I'm designing them. That sounded way too businessy. I don't even like the way that sounded, but it's like for me, it's like I want to make something awesome. If I succeed, then it does well, and that's usually that is the approach. But yeah, I mean, these days some are reoccurring. Like we have basically like a program, if you will, with Timex. It wasn't approached like that, but they said, oh, we'd love to do one with you a few years ago. We did our first one. It went well. And now it's become this annual thing, which we have to plan at least a full. I have designs ready for that for spring of 2026 already, because to work well in advance for them.
Which you're going to share with everyone right now, right?
Yeah. Amazingly, I just saw our first samples for literally a year from now yesterday. Like they sent me photos. It's like, wow. But yeah, it's you get they're big companies. So you need a long lead, and they're very cool, very excited.
Nice.
It's just a little bit of a difference in the most recent ones. Changed the dial a bit. And then we still we approach brands at times that are just exciting to us, or they have just become friendly with. It's an interesting thing. It's changed over the years. It used to be, well, edgy, if you will, almost like, oh, look, you're collaborating with a watch brand. That's pretty cool. And now it's like everybody does it, right? It's like not every other media site, but there's been spin-off companies developed by media sites that just focus on limited editions and collaboration. So the magic of just making a collaboration is, I think, sort of gone. I think it really comes down to, the quality of the design, and if you still have to make something that's worth buying, right? It's not just enough for it to exist anymore, and the customers are speaking with their dollars at this point, right? Like limited editions don't just fly off the shelves because they're limited anymore. They sell if they're successful and people, enjoy them. It's probably most successful in the last couple of years, just in terms of straight sell through, was the Laurier we did a few months ago, the Astra. And that's a great example to me of a limited edition that went perfectly well. We had a lot of fun designing it. The samples were cool. it was like there was all positive, smooth sailing, and then we launched it and it sold well, kind of a thing. And it's like, it just felt right the whole time. They're cool. They're a good example of just also a brand to work with, because they're like, Zach, you do you. Like, you've come up with something, and we'll bounce it back and forth. Obviously, they want to like make sure it's comfortable to them. I've pitched them some weird stuff in the day, but they're also open-minded. They're like, we like that because we wouldn't put it in our main line, but it still feels like something we want to do with you. And so
Well, certainly these collaborations, they've been part of your success, but they're also a measure of your success. And with that success, you guys have had to grow a lot over the last decade. Can you describe the space where you're working now, and perhaps maybe what a typical day looks like in this space, if there is such a thing as a typical day?
Yeah, so we have like a converted warehouse sort of office space in Brooklyn, in Gowanus, that it's like an old factory kind of a thing, and I think it's like 3,000-ish square feet. So it's mostly like a big open space that there's a caveat. We just changed a bunch of things that I'll add at the end, but it's a big open space that most of the employees have their desks in. Not everyone's in New York, so there's also just that. And then but people come in and go. Like Kat will come in probably once a month or so. Same thing with Zach Kazan. And then on the kind of side of this office were some built out rooms that were there before we moved in. And one of those is Blake and Mai's office. Then we have our conference room / video shooting room / podcast room if we're in the office. And then a separate photo studio as well, which is a smaller room, but it's it's good because the flash, you need to keep the flash out of everyone's face when it's going all day. When we used to just have one big space, that was very annoying. But now it's separate. I go into the office 2 to 3 times a week. Usually, it kind of depends on what I need to do. I like to, if I need to really put like head down and work, I do prefer just to work from home on those days, because I can just really like literally shut the door. There's no one around me, and I can just work, kind of steadily. And when I'm writing in particular, I don't know, Mark, if you're like this, but it's like, I need to go for 2 or 3 hours straight. If I get interrupted every 45 minutes, like I just can't get a good flow going. So that's important to me. But yeah, when we're in the office though, it's a lot of, it's a mix of head down working and a lot of, chatting about things that are coming up. It's a really nice environment in there, actually. Everyone gets along super well. So it's like a nice, friendly team kind of a feeling. But so I was going to add though, that we actually just built out a showroom in our office. So this is like a project of the last month or so that this where like Mallet really helmed. So it's something we've talked about for a while. And we've had the ability to set up appointments via the shop website to like come in and look at something. We call them, we call them consultations before, and just people would come in, and they're always when people come in to look at a watch, they tend to buy it, or if not buy it that moment, they'll think about it. And we obviously, we're a store, we have a warehouse, we have all these products there. So we decided, it makes sense for us to put a showroom in our office. Plus, we like having events in our office, but because it's a working office space, you can't always just it's not the easiest thing to bring people into. There's a lot of stuff around. Some of it's literally embargoed. It's like you have to take a while to hide everything. So we have this new showroom, and it's going to be kind of officially opening beginning of September. Beginning of December. And now we're going to, have the ability to bring people into our office space a lot more. So, check the website in a little while. But if you happen to be coming through New York City, you can set up a time to come to our showroom, look at watches that are on display there, talk to people who are from the team, kind of a thing. So very excited about that, because we've always been sort of, community focused in our way, but at the same time, it's very easy to hide a lot too, and just, do work. And, we want to engage more with people, because, and most of us will say, our wind up watch fairs, things like that. The best part of it is meeting all the people and talking to our fans. Bob, I think if you're a YouTuber, like just going by YouTube comments and things isn't necessarily the greatest way to get like a sampling of what your audience is like.
Not.
So
I actually have a kind of a change of gears question for you just for a second. I always find it kind of interesting to hear people's passions, other hobbies other than watches. And there's one that we share, which is photography. And it seems like a lot of watch people are into photography for some reason. But is that something that was sort of before Worn and Wound, or did that come about sort of developing that skill because of Worn and Wound? And do you still shoot for Worn and Wound occasionally?
Yeah, so I got into photography. I got a camera, I should say, like after college, so that when I went to grad school, I could like document my work better. That was just a practical thing, like, and because I didn't have very good photos from college, and at the time digital cameras were different. It's like 2006 or something. Yeah. It's a very long time ago. But yeah, so I got like a Canon Rebel XT DSLR, right? And so like once you have the DSLR, you kind of get into things. But I didn't really like get into photography as like a hobby at that time. And then with Worn and Wound kicking up, like I got macro lens. I invested a little bit into more gear and started attempting to take better photographs without any like education in it at all. But that definitely grew my interest for a while. But then I'm trying to think, like the arc of this, I guess we got a photographer, plus we just had more people around who were doing photography. I started doing photography less for the site. And I kind of eventually stopped doing anything for like maybe a year or two. And then I got back into casual photography, actually by way of a reader who was at Wind Up Watch Fair, San Francisco, several years ago, who I talked to a bit, but he knew I had some interest in cameras, and he was just like, Zach, just borrow this camera, just take it, walk around for a few hours. So I was like, okay, cool. And it was a little like a Fuji X100F, and it was. Just shooting on that thing was so beautiful, like the way it felt, the way it sounded. And I was just suddenly like, I just had that immediate, like, I need this in my life. And it was compact enough that I thought, I'll get one of these. I'll walk around more with it. That was, the DSLRs are so huge that like even a small kit was like was just a lot to carry around. And I didn't really like walking around New York City with like 10 pounds of camera on my hip. It didn't really feel natural to me. So yeah, from there that kind of kicked it up again. And yeah, I had a few Fujis and a few Sonys, which we combined since phony. And then
no, Zach, this guy in San Francisco, did he have a trench coat, and did he pull the camera out the side pocket and say, "Hey, try this"?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the last year or so, I've put in a much more conscious effort actually into becoming a better photographer in my own time. And I spent a little bit on gear, but just things like I'm getting better at flash photography and things like that. And also now that we have like a nice studio set up, like we have some nice gear in the office, I will go in and shoot there. And I do shoot on occasion, maybe like one or two watches for editorial a month.
That's cool.
But then I have a Leica range for like a Type 240 that I got earlier this year. I got sucked in. I tried to avoid the Leica watch guy thing for just I could only do it for so long because they just feel so amazing in hand. And that's really nice. Also, like just a different style of photography from like the studio shooting. It's like there's no fuss. It's all analog. It's kind of puts you in the moment of taking a photo a little bit more. And yeah, so I'm actually more into photography now than I think I've ever have been.
That's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, so Zach, I've got some questions regarding podcasting, since that's what we're doing right now. I've been a podcast listener for a long time, as our listeners know. And I've been listening to the Warner One podcast from the beginning, well before Zach Weiss was main host. And it was just you and Blake, two buddies talking about watches. And while the format has not changed very much, it's still friends talking about watches. But now there's a total of 6 podcasts, Changing Gears, Time on Screen, Time on Track, the original podcast, This Week in Watches, and the newest one, Unwinding. While This Week in Watches is shortest one in duration, it probably has the most preparation since it's a scripted news style show. So you host 2 of these shows and frequently participate on the others. How do you keep up with all this? And how do you keep up with that and your responsibilities for Warner Wound?
Yeah, I mean, so most of those podcasts, like the Warner Wound podcast, Changing Gears, Time on Track, Time on Screen, if I can remember them all. Those are all other people's problems at this point. Zach and Kat and Ricardo manage all of those. And, I just, at this point, they'll be like, hey, Zach, we're doing this topic this week. Do you want to jump on, kind of a thing? So I kind of participate as I can. The Week in Watches, it's funny. Like to me, it's a YouTube video, and we had the idea of putting it on the podcast as well, because it was sort of this tight, news focused thing. It felt like an easy thing to listen to or an easy thing to kind of skip. Those are exhausting to write, I won't lie. And like I always, every week, like even this week, I was like, I'm gonna make this one like shorter, like brief. I'm just gonna get through the topics. It'll be maybe a 10-minute video tops, like 3,500 word script later, and I'm like, it's like a 20+ minute long video because I got into like the GPHG awards and just all this stuff. And it just, so I'm my own worst enemy with these things because I just get into it. I would like to have more assistance on Awaken Watches at some point, eventually, maybe as we have more editorial team in the office. Because that one does occasionally, I'm like, yeah, I have this other work to do, but if I don't finish the script, it literally won't, I won't be able to shoot it. And then that screws everything up. But then the new podcast, Unwinding, that one we're still just sort of feeling out, that's a pretty loose preparation. Just had like general outlines for the first 2 of them. Honestly, we didn't know if that would even go over, but we had a really wonderful response from the first episode in particular. A lot of people reached out to say that they enjoyed it. Not just readers, but like industry people that we know. So it was really, nice to hear that. So we're going to keep that up, but once a month, I was like very pointed, like, I don't think I can do another multi-week like preparation kind of thing. We can do this once a month and they'll think about it because, even every other week, you're like, oh, that sounds like a good amount of time, but it's right there. You're constantly thinking about it. So that was a challenge, honestly, with the podcast in the early days when it was really, it's me, Ilya, and Blake, but mostly me, Ilya, and I hosting those. And just like every week, it's like, what's our topic? What are we going to do? And it's tough.
A month into watches, maybe.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I mean, a Week in Watches is already every other Week in Watches. That just doesn't roll off the tongue as well. But
a week whenever we feel like it.
Yeah, and that's literally why it became every other week, because it was a lot of work, and then there wasn't always like enough in just 1 week. Like 2 weeks gives you enough of a gap for like news to build up. But yeah, it was taking too much of my time. So
yeah, that new show with Blake, what prompted that? Was it something that Blake wanted to get back on the show, or you've had questions regarding back behind the scenes? What prompted that show?
It was actually funny timing because the concept for it popped into my head largely from like listening to some other watch podcasts and hearing a mix of people talking about the industry and sort of behind the scenes aspects of the industry or the business of being in watch media without necessarily having any experience in it. And I see this a lot also, in comments on social media of people telling other people what it's like to run a business, to run any kind of media business, let alone watch media, about, some of the stuff you're bringing up before, in terms of just like the editorial and sponsorship split. I don't know, this feels like there's like a weird sort of moment happening right now where people are sort of, I guess it's whatever, it's a broader topic, but like sort of attacking media for being like, corrupt. And for us, it's like, this is supposed to be a good time. At the end of the day, we're writing about watches, like, please don't forget it. But the idea just occurred to me, it's like, well, you know what, we have actually been doing this for almost 14 years now. Like, we can't speak to what it's like to run every other, website or like a printed magazine per se, but we've heard a lot of anecdotes. We have a lot of personal experience. Let's at least talk about it from our perspective, so that maybe people don't think you start running a watch blog and within a year you're buying fancy cars and Pateks and whatever, because it's certainly not like that. You know what I mean? It's been a real grind for a very long time, and now the company's coasting, but we're still not buying sports cars and Pateks. You know what I mean? And then and at the same time, so I was like, I actually went and then told Blake, it's like, I was thinking we should do this, we should start talking, and he was like basically at the same time, like, yeah, he would love to get back on a podcast, and it was something he had been thinking about too, because actually between the two of us, like, he is an avid podcast listener. I think not just watch stuff, but really, like that's his preferred like thing to listen to, our podcast. So whereas I actually prefer to listen to music most of the time, because I feel like I spend enough time in meetings that I don't need to listen to people talk the rest of the day. But
yeah, so how do you view the podcast wing of Worn and Wound? Was the goal initially to get more eyeballs and hopefully wallets going towards the main website? And if so, is it working?
Initially it was one of these things where we just felt like there weren't really any other watch podcasts. I mean, I think technically there were, but they didn't have quite traction at the moment. And once again, like Blake, as a avid podcast consumer, was like, we should do this. It's fun. Plus, it'll sort of, the idea initially was to kind of capture the conversations we were having in the office about watches that are a little bit more, off the cuff, that ends up in written, editorial, just by the nature of a podcast and just being more casual. In terms of goal, I mean, there wasn't really one. It was, let's do this. Let's see if people like it. If it has any kind of traction, who knows? Maybe we can sell ads on there. But it, I feel like if we went into it, if I give people a bit of advice, if they want to get into like making a YouTube channel or making a podcast or whatever in this industry, it's like, you should do it first for yourself, right? It's like, you have to enjoy it. You have to want to do it, because it's very hard to monetize anything. And a niche podcast can only ever be so big as, the true crime podcasts of the world, kind of a thing. So it's like, depending on what your goals are with it, it's just, there's just realities to, the scope of them. So at this point for us, it's really cultural, right? Like, people really enjoy the podcast. Sometimes they are involved in like sponsorship packages, but it's really not a driver for it at all. Most of the podcasts, you would hear it if you're listening to the podcast, it was sponsored, and they're really, most of the time they are not. It's just part of our, our media offering, if you will.
Yeah. And with so many shows now in your network, are you considering maybe producing other shows and hosting them on your network, like sort of what Earwolf does or Stitcher or something like that?
Yeah, we've talked about it, but just sort of as a loose concept. It's not something we're like actively pursuing at the moment. But yeah, I mean, once we realize, we have enough shows to call it a network of some sort, that maybe there would be that opportunity out there. But it just hasn't really been something we focused on yet.
Yeah, and as someone who's written a couple of these podcast ads that you talked about, it always startles me when you guys are talking and all of a sudden breaks into ad, and the words that start are mine. It kind of startles me every single time. And there was one in particular that I had written for Sternglass, where I had started the text itself when I sent it to Aaron. I did 4,404,800 minutes, 4,404,800 moments so dear. And I was trying to play off the rent joke, and you guys didn't go for it. But in my head, I could hear Kazan singing that. It would have been really funny. So basically, that's basically all I have here. We did. I was going to ask you guys, or ask you about advice for us. I mean, we asked Ricky from Scottish Watches for advice, and Jody as well. You already provided some great advice as to doing this for ourselves, and we're genuinely curious about the industry and about the people we interview and what we talk about. Is there anything you can give us as far as advice?
Yeah, wow. If I knew the question was coming, I would have saved what I just said, right? But yeah, I think it's an industry where people are very aware of authenticity, and I'd say the consumers of the content are the most aware, and then the creators are sometimes aware. You know what I mean? And like, it's when if you find that that starts to come into question, right? If you're not putting forth something that's true to your personality or why you are why you got into this or why you started it, like people will start to become aware of that. It's just in the tone of people's voices, the style of things, it just changes. And, you can see that happen on occasion. And, I think that is at times people's biggest enemy. Because, like, for example, tomorrow you just only started talking about like the highest bids at auctions. I don't know, something silly. It's like, that wouldn't really be you guys, right? It's like, it's not what you're into. Even if, let's say, that was the thing that would get you the most listeners, right? So yeah, it's just being honest and true to yourselves. Stay away from, no, I'm just like, yeah, I don't, and obviously I don't know what you guys have planned, but it's, yeah, and just enjoy it. And that's the other thing. Like, if you're not enjoying it, don't keep doing it. I think I've seen that from people too. It's like, clearly they've gotten kind of burnt out by the industry at times, but they keep pushing forward. And it's like, like I said, it's a hard business to monetize, and the rewards aren't so great. So it's like, don't make yourself suffer either for it at a certain point.
Yeah, for sure. We're still learning. This is our 10th episode, and we've been very blessed with having wonderful guests such as yourself come on and talk about their passion and talk about their hobbies. And we're very lucky, and we hopefully will continue for a while. And we're having fun, I believe. So
yeah,
we'll
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Zach, I think I can speak for all three of us when I say how much we were looking forward to this morning, and you really didn't disappoint. It's not easy to be in the hot seat for an hour plus, and we appreciate your candor here this morning. But you said it, we also appreciate your authenticity always.
Thank you.
So more than anything else, we really appreciate your time. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun and good questions, by the way. I did not never know going into these. So yeah, no, very good questions. And yeah, it's been fun, guys. So yeah.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.
All right, you guys have a great weekend, everyone.
You too. Thanks again, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.
Time to Calibrate is available anywhere you can listen to fine podcasts, so please do subscribe, like, and hit all those bells and whistles. It does make a difference. Until next time, thanks for listening.